Now that we've covered our bases on verb tenses and verbals, it's time to discuss one of the most common question types on the SAT, subject-verb agreement. In order to solve subject-verb agreement problems, we need to first establish what a subject is within a clause. Although we often think of the subject as the main character within a clause or a sentence, we can more precisely understand what a subject is by defining it as the noun or a noun element that carries the action of the verb. In this sense, the subject is inseparable from its verb. Let's take a look at an example. Today, McDonald's reintroduced the Arch Deluxe. Now, the return of the Arch Deluxe may be little more than my fondest wish dream, but without a doubt, it's clear from this sentence that McDonald's is the subject. But how do we really know this? Well, we begin by identifying the verb tense used in the sentence. Here we see the verb reintroduced in its simple past form, which is one of the 12 tenses that we've discussed in the previous video. Then we ask ourselves, which noun element has the capacity to introduce anything? Today, McDonald's, or Arch Deluxe? Well, by starting with the verb, we're able to ask which of these nouns has the capacity to carry out the action that it describes, which will almost always provide the most accurate identification of the subject. But let's take a look at a different example. Atop my ice cream sundae sit two bright red cherries. In this sentence, we have to be a bit more careful. We have two nouns, ice cream sundae and bright red cherries. However, because the ice cream sundae appears first, many students make the mistake of identifying it as the subject. But in reality, identifying the verb tense as sit, we ask ourselves, well, what's sitting on what? Is the ice cream sundae sitting on top of the two bright red cherries? Well, in my vision of that 1950s diner, I can clearly see that the two bright red cherries are the ones that are sitting atop the ice cream sundae. And as such, the subject in this sentence is in fact two bright red cherries. And this example also demonstrates why the verb is in its plural form sit and not sits, as two cherries would qualify as a plural noun. The very nature of subject-verb agreement questions on the SAT is demonstrated with this ice cream sundae example. Number agreement between that of the subject and that of the verb. Now, obviously, the exam will not try to trick you with blatantly misworded sentences such as the birds flies beautifully across the sky. Because when it comes to subject-verb agreement questions, there are four major traps that the exam can set. So let's take a look at those examples. In this first trap, the SAT will separate the subject and its verb by an insertion of an appositive. Now, positives are descriptive elements that are non-essential to the sentence. So here's an example. The orphanages of Idaho, now no longer funded by the state, blank expected to raise their own funding in the coming fiscal year. So what form of the verb to be goes in the blank? Is it is or is it are? In order to solve this question, we must correctly identify the subject. As described at the beginning of this video, we do this by identifying the noun element that can carry the action of the verb. So what exactly is or are expected to raise their own funding? Well, let's find out. Well, first, Idaho is practically an adverb used to describe the location of orphanages. The state refers to Idaho and wouldn't be expected to raise its own funds. In addition, it's described as the entity that's no longer funding the subject which the blank corresponds to. Fiscal year, like state, is yet another descriptive noun identifying time. It would not be expected to raise its own funds. Therefore, the only other noun that we're left with is orphanages. As such, we identify orphanages as the subject, which is a plural subject, necessitating are as the correct verb number in this sentence. This is a variation of the first trap, but ups the ante a little bit more. Instead of identifying an appositive within two commas, the exam separates the subject from its verb by the insertion of a long phrase. Let's take a look at an example of this one. The striking pattern found on the wings of monarch butterflies, blank predators of the insect's toxic nature. So what should the blank be? Warns or warn? Well, this is a very tricky question indeed. One could argue that butterflies are the ones that are warning the predators, or perhaps that the wings themselves are warning the predators too. But upon further analysis, we see that it's more specifically the pattern, a singular noun, that carries the action of the verb warning. Therefore, the singular subject should be paired with warns, which is a singular verb. Now, This third trap might actually help clarify the example that we've just discussed. In this case, we see that the SAT creates noun phrases using one or more prepositions to throw off students. So let's look at some simple examples and we'll swing back around to that second trap. The board of directors is set to meet at noon. In this example, the sentence introduces the subject board of directors, which by all accounts is comprised of many individuals. In grammar, however, we have to be very precise. That is, what is actually set to meet at noon is the board, which, while it may contain several members, is itself a singular noun. More importantly, we note that any time a noun follows a preposition, such as of, it cannot be the subject. In fact, it's always the noun that sits ahead of a prepositional phrase that acts as a subject. And we can try this exercise with the following phrase: the second floor of the house on the lake. Here we see two prepositions, of and on. Following our rule of no subject after the preposition, we can be certain that neither the house nor the lake could be the subject in any sentence that this phrase is plugged into. So going back to our second trap, we revisit the following sentence. The striking pattern on the wings of monarch butterflies warns predators of the insect's toxic nature. Because on and of are both prepositions, we can instantly rule out wings and monarch butterflies as our subjects, thereby allowing us to isolate the striking pattern as, in fact, our subject. In this last part, I will collect several related tricks that the SAT uses from time to time. First, let's explore nouns that seem plural. In spoken English, we often make number mistakes. For example, I might say, I called the school today and they told me that the school's closed because of the snowstorm. So even though the school should be a singular noun, we often refer to as a they due to its organizational nature. As such, we have to be careful when dealing with similar plural-sounding nouns that are actually singular. These nouns include the following: organizations such as banks, schools, or government institutions, teams, whether it be sports or academic, bands, cities, states, or even countries. So while recent derivations of the exam haven't employed these nouns too often, it's still worthwhile to note them, as you never know what the next test will contain. And as a side, we also have to acknowledge that nouns can come together as compound subjects, which are plural, with the usage of the word and. The word and is an extremely powerful conjunction because it's the only word in English that has the capacity to create compound subjects. Let me explain what I mean by this. Mario, along with Luigi, are or is going to the Mushroom Kingdom. Well, what's it gonna be? Well, picturing the Italian plumbers in our minds, we can clearly see that there are two individuals en route to the Mushroom Kingdom. However, as mentioned prior, grammar is precise, and precisely the right answer is. This is because we cannot create a plural compound subject without an and. In fact, we can also see that the preposition with precedes Luigi, which means that Luigi cannot be part of the subject in this sentence. Now compare this to the following. Mario and Luigi are going to the Mushroom Kingdom. Here, due to our usage of and to combine Mario and Luigi into a compound subject, we can give them their proper plural status that necessitates the usage of are in this sentence. Another noteworthy fact that's really important is that gerunds, you see those verb forms that ends with an ing, such as talking or eating, can act as nouns in sentences. And when they do, they're sometimes subjects. And these subjects are always singular. Swimming is fun. Just thinking about cake makes me hungry. And bribing politicians can lead to corruption are all examples that properly utilize the singular verb in describing the gerunds. In practical terms, these questions are super easy. As mentioned in my previous video on verbs, we always see this 3-to-1 ratio of singular to plural or vice versa forms of verbs. So let's take a look at a quick example, and that will be it for today. Developing increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligence models for precision medical diagnostics, a formidable undertaking requiring immense computational resources and vast repositories of curated data, blank, a preeminent research objective for numerous leading biomedical institutions worldwide. Wow. Here are the answer choices: remain, have remained, are remaining, and remains. Now, even though the sentence is really confusing, using only the strategies that we've discussed before, the answer should be D, remains, which is most likely the answer because that's the only verb that goes with a singular subject. But now that we've learned how this all plays out, let's talk about what's actually going on here. First, we're using several traps together. We have a gerund subject, developing. We also have a bunch of words following that subject, and we also see on a positive that separates that subject from its verb. But ultimately, as long as you can ignore everything else, we can see the sentence for what it actually is. Developing AI models remains a preeminent research objective. This is what I like to think of as the skeletal framework of the sentence that keeps it complete, and sometimes that's all we need to see. Hey, if you found this video helpful, be sure to click like, subscribe, and share it with a friend who's about to take their SAT too. And this has been Mikey with Avo Prep Academy. We'll see you in the next video.